When we reviewed the MG5 EV at the beginning of the year, we were mightily impressed by just how much it gave you for the money. Now MG is back with this, the MG5 EV, the UK's first electric estate car. It's just 24.5 grand. But is it cheap and cheerful or cheap and nasty? Before I start telling you about the MG5 EV though, please don't forget, if you like this video, subscribe to our channel on YouTube. And now back to the MG5 EV. It's a real surprise that this is the first EV on the UK market to adopt the estate car format. The SUV body type may have taken over in sales percentages, but the estate car is still a highly practical format. One thing MG hasn't done is just stuff the same drivetrain as the MG5 EV into an estate body. The MG5 EV has a slightly bigger 52.5 kilowatt-hour battery pack and more powerful 154 bhp motor. The MG5 EV is heavily based on a Chinese car called the Roe EI5, and it's pretty bland and generic looking. But you don't have to buy an EV at this price and expect the design flair of a Maserati. You do get a lot for your money. The 16-inch alloys are a standard feature on all cars, for example. The two broad trim types are the same as the MG5 EV. The basic one is called Excite and still includes niceties like front and rear electric windows, the sat-nav, a rear parking camera and cruise control. The basic paint colour is white, but for £545 extra you can have black, silver or this blue. For £695 extra you can have a red tri-coat paint job. The other thing the exclusive trim level adds is this smart keyless entry system. Just press this button to open, and if you want to shut it again, you press that button again. MG only calls the exclusive seat material we see here leather-like, presumably because it's not leather. The Excite merely uses cloth. The leather-like seats are heated and the driver's side only is electrically adjusted. The passenger seat is mechanical, and with the Excite trim both seats are. The front seats are reasonably comfortable, but you don't get quite as much headroom as we have come to expect on a lot of EVs. The interior design is very traditional in look, and there's nothing like a panoramic sunroof to give you a greater sense of interior space. The plastic elements are a bit cheap but not terrible. You get a couple of USB ports in the central console and an actual 12-volt car power adapter as well. However, there's no wireless phone charging and there's nowhere to rest your phone when charging it with a wire. There are a couple of cup holders and a small cubby under the armrest. However, there isn't a lot of storage for front passengers. The glove compartment is quite small too. You do get this area here for putting in papers like maps. You get a similar amount of headroom in the back as the front, and actually the knee room isn't too bad. The middle seat is a little wider than in some cars, so this is a little bit more viable for 5 passengers. With 4 passengers, you can pull the middle seat back down to make an armrest with a couple of cup holders. Weirdly, the air conditioning vent in the back is at feet level, so it's more of a foot warmer, but you do get a couple of USB plugs, which is pretty good for a car at this price. And of course, a magazine holder for your kids to put their copy of 2000 AD or whatever kids read these days. Of course, you buy an estate car for its load lugging ability, and the MG5 EV does not disappoint in this area. As standard, that's 464 litres, and if you retract this thing, which is obviously not that easy, it's 578 litres. There is a little bit of extra space under the boot floor, but as you can see, it's just enough for the tyre inflator kit. You could put a spare tyre in there if you wanted to, but that doesn't come with the car. You've got the usual 40-60 arrangement for the rear boot. This expands things out to 1,456 litres, which is actually a little bit more than an Audi A4 Avant estate, a little bit less than a C-Class Mercedes or a BMW 3 Series estate, but very usable. You do get a little bit of extra space in front of the rear seats. However, the fact that this isn't entirely flat could be a bit of a pain. Overall though, this is a pretty decently sized amount of load lugging ability. And you pop the trunk by pulling inside. As you can see, there's no frunk. In fact, you can't see anything here. There are minimal serviceable bits in here. You get the washer, not quite sure what that's for, and there's one underneath there as well. The biggest downside with the MG5 EV was the range. Some people could manage to get maybe 180 miles out of it, but most people couldn't. That made the MG5 EV more of a city car. Now the good news with the MG5 EV is that it now has a 214 mile WLTP range, which is much more viable if you want to go from city to city. DC charging above 50 kilowatts is supported, taking 40 minutes to hit 80% on a 100 kilowatt supply. On a 7 kilowatt AC supply, it's 8.5 hours. or 18 hours on a 2.2 kilowatt granny charger. This is a reasonably cheap car to charge, costing 3.43p a mile on a 14p per kilowatt hour electricity supply. Now let's talk about the general car controls. MG has provided a very traditional set of steering wheel controls with a plethora of buttons for things like the volume and the phone, and this is kind of general menu choices over on the right hand side here. The right hand stalk controls the wipers. These have an automatic function on the exclusive trim. The left hand stalk is for the lights, and below that is another stalk for the cruise control. All cars have a start stop button and detect the presence of the key. As you can see, the dashboard display is very conventional, with an actual speedo dial on the left and a real dial showing engine power or braking regeneration on the right. You also get a battery percentage on the left with a very tiny readout of range that you won't be able to see easily if you have middle-aged eyesight. The middle section is an LCD panel with digital speed readout and various contextual information. As with the range in miles, a lot of the symbols are quite small and hard to see. The drive modes are operated with this rotating knob, with left for reverse, right for forward, neutral in the middle, and you press the button on the top for park. There is a separate parking brake, but you don't need to use the switch for that, as it goes on and off automatically as you select and deselect park. Next to the electronic parking brake button is the auto hold option. There are 3 switches above the drive control knob. The one on the left selects the modes with eco, normal and sport, and then the KERS button, although this isn't KERS, it's just a battery regeneration system, changes the regeneration level of the battery, and there's this battery one, the use of which we don't actually know. Above this is a full set of controls for the air conditioning, which has an auto mode with the exclusive trim. You've got buttons for various functions that are impossible to see in the dark, but the left hand knob controls temperature and the right hand side one fan speed, which is very easy to operate when driving. If MG hasn't spent money on a futuristic set of general controls, they certainly haven't pushed the boat out either with the 7-inch media control touchscreen. It's functional but quite slow to operate. The sat-nav in particular is very slow to respond. As you can see, it's taking a lot of time to load. You'll also notice that address entry takes quite a long time too. It's a very sluggish system. It's functional but slow. You get DAB, FM and AM radio with this car. There's also support for Android Auto and Apple CarPlay as well. Now if you go into this car menu, you can change a few settings like the lighting, how the battery is dealt with, a few settings for smartphone and mirror folding. Stability control, you can turn that off and on. You can reset to factory. If you actually select this setup mode, there are a few other things. You can change the audio and equalization and even kind of move the soundstage around. Choose whether you're getting traffic from RDS, which is, at least you've got some traffic here. There's no live traffic though. Set the time, pair a Bluetooth phone or other device, and change how the display is shown. And that's your lot. It's not exactly a Tesla menu. This may be a cheap EV, but it's definitely no slouch. It'll hit 60 miles per hour in 7.3 seconds and go onwards to 115 miles per hour. It also delivers the performance pretty smoothly. The MG5 is front-wheel drive, but it's not powerful enough to deliver noticeable torque steer. The suspension is really soft, which is pretty good for going over speed bumps. However, it doesn't make the MG5 a particularly involving drive. The handling is essentially adequate. The fact that it's a bit faster in a straight line than a generic estate car does give it a little bit of a fun factor. Overall, it's more of a practical family workhorse than a driver's car. It copes adequately at motorway speeds, and unlike the MG ZS EV, has just enough range to make highway jaunts viable. As we've already mentioned, all cars have adaptive cruise control. There's also tyre pressure monitoring, emergency brake assist and electronic stability control. This is one area where the MG isn't quite up there with other manufacturers. It doesn't include lane departure warning or lane keep assist. The MG5 EV doesn't have an NCAP rating yet, but the MG ZS EV has a 5-star rating, so that bodes well for this car. Like the ZS, the biggest surprise about the MG5 EV is just how cheap it is. With the government grant, the Excite costs just $24,495, which is even cheaper than a Renault Zoe. The The Exclusive is £2,500 more expensive. That's still pretty reasonable, but the Excite is an absolute bargain. The MG comes with a warranty that's on a par with Korean cars. It's 7 years for 80,000 miles. That includes the battery, but MG doesn't state for what capacity level it warranties. All versions of the MG5 are in insurance group 32, which is a little on the high side, but not extortionate. This isn't a bad little car for driving on country roads. As I say, it's not a driver's car, but it's good enough, and you've got that 7.3 0 to 60, which gives it a little bit of extra oomph when you're accelerating. Because the controls are completely conventional, it's extremely obvious how to drive this car. It's just like any other car you've ever driven before. If you don't like manufacturers that put so much in the central tablet, then this will appeal to you, even though it's actually a cost-cutting feature with this car. MG's done a pretty good job with noise suppression. This is quite a quiet car to be inside. My cameraman reports that the acceleration is there, but it's not likely to lose control of the equipment. Unlike most Teslas, where you lose control not just of the equipment, but quite possibly your brain. Overall, this is one of the cheapest ways to get into EV ownership. The MG5 EV definitely has its rough edges, but for under 25 grand, it's incredible value. The range is usable and it's immensely practical. If you've been putting off purchasing an electric car because they're just too expensive, this could just be the vehicle to get you started. Please don't forget, if you like this video, subscribe to our channel on YouTube.